They say money can't buy happiness. But with all due respect to whoever coined that phrase, they probably never priced out a 30-acre parcel with a private 10-acre lake nestled right in the middle. I can tell you from experience, it buys something pretty darn close. It buys you quiet mornings, the plink of a lure hitting glassy water, and the rustle of deer in the woods that you and you alone own. What it apparently can't buy, however, is the right to enjoy any of it without the self-appointed queen of the suburbs. A woman named Brenda, who seemed to subsist on a diet of pure entitlement and watered-down Chardonnay, calling the police on you. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because this story gets crazy. What Brenda, the president of our prestigious homeowners association, didn't understand was that her decision to dial 911 on me for trespassing on my own property was about to become the single most expensive phone call of her entire life. By the time I was done, that one act of magnificent arrogance would cost her, personally and directly, a staggering $1.6 million. My story starts not with a bang, but with a signature on a closing document that officially marked the end of my 40-year career as a real estate developer. For 4 decades, I'd navigated the labyrinthine world of zoning variances, wetlands commissions, contentious town hall meetings, and ruthless competitors who would sue you over the placement of a storm drain. I was good at it, but I was tired. All I wanted was a peaceful retirement. My wife had passed a few years prior, and the sprawling suburban house we'd raised our kids in was now just a collection of empty, silent rooms. I sold it and bought what my realtor called the crown jewel of Azure Springs, a custom-built home on a massive wooded lot. The house was nice, sure, but I didn't buy the house. I bought the lake. It was a pristine, spring-fed body of water, and according to every single document I'd meticulously reviewed, it was located entirely within the boundaries of my new property. The title search was clean, the county plat maps were unambiguous, and the official survey, with its stake still visible on the shoreline, confirmed it. The lake was mine. This was my endgame: coffee, a fishing rod, and glorious, uninterrupted solitude. Azure Springs was one of those communities that uses words like exclusive and covenant protected to mean expensive and full of rules. I knew what I was getting into. I developed communities like this myself, but the allure of that private lake was too strong to resist. I was willing to tolerate a certain level of suburban nonsense for it. My first taste of that nonsense arrived on moving day, thrumming up my long, winding driveway on a golf cart that had more chrome than my first car. It was Brenda. She had a stiff, platinum blonde bob that looked like it could deflect small arms fire, and was wearing a tennis skirt, despite being nowhere near a tennis court. She didn't introduce herself with a welcoming smile or a plate of brownies. She introduced herself with a clipboard and an air of profound disappointment. She looked at my moving truck, then at me, and said, "The moving van needs to be gone by 6 p.m. Commercial vehicles are not permitted overnight." She then handed me a binder 3 inches thick, the HOA covenants, with a thud. "You'll want to read this. All of it. We take our community standards very seriously here." It wasn't a welcome, it was an audit. I saw her for what she was in that instant, not a neighbor, but a warden. This was her personal fiefdom, and I was the new, unknown variable she needed to control. For a few weeks, I managed to avoid her. I was busy unpacking, setting up my workshop, and, most importantly, enjoying my lake. I bought a small, silent electric pontoon boat, nothing loud or obnoxious, just a stable platform for fishing. One perfect Tuesday morning, I was out in the middle of the lake. The sun was just burning the mist off the water. It was dead silent except for a woodpecker hammering away in the woods. This was it. This was the peace I'd paid for. Then, a new sound intruded, the high-pitched whine of a hornet. I looked up and saw a drone hovering about 50 feet above my boat, its little camera lens pointed directly at me. I scanned the shoreline, and there she was, Brenda, standing on the manicured lawn of a neighbor's property, her white Lexus SUV parked in their drive, phone pressed to her ear. She was gesticulating, pointing frantically out at me, her expression one of high drama and theatrical outrage. It was so absurd I almost laughed. 20 minutes later, the absurdity curdled into annoyance. I saw the flashing lights first, glinting through the trees that lined my driveway. 2 police cruisers. They were coming for me. For fishing. On my own lake. I reeled in my line, took a slow, deep breath, and pointed the little boat back toward my dock. The warden had just made her first big move. The game, one I never wanted to play, had officially begun. And as I'd learned over 40 years in my business, if someone forces you play to win. The 2 officers met me as I was tying the boat to my dock. They were young, professional, and had the distinct look of men who would rather be anywhere else. The older of the 2, Officer Miller, spoke first. "Sir, we received a call about a trespasser on the lake." He gestured vaguely at the water, then at me. "I assume that's you?" I looked at them, at my house 100 yards up the hill, at my boat, and finally at my fishing rod. "Gentlemen," I said, with a calm I did not feel, "I'm the owner of this property. That includes the lake." I could see Brenda still lingering at the edge of the neighbor's yard, watching the whole scene unfold like she was a Roman empress at the Colosseum, ready to give the thumbs down. She wanted a show. She wanted me humiliated, cited, and escorted off my own land. It was a pure power play. This wasn't my first rodeo with this kind of person. In my career, I dealt with dozens of Brenda Small people given a taste of authority who become drunk on it. The key is to never, ever meet their emotional hysterics with your own. You meet it with cold, boring, inarguable facts. Before leaving the house, I tossed a waterproof document folio into the boat. It's an old habit from my site inspection days. You always bring the paperwork. I unzipped it and pulled out a folded, certified copy of my property survey. "Here you are, officers," I said, handing it to them. "As you can see, marked clearly by the official county surveyor, my property line extends roughly 50 feet beyond the far shore of the lake. The entire body of water, the dock, and the land under it are part of this parcel. Lot 1. I pointed to the surveyor's stakes, which were still visible on both sides of the lake, bright orange flags topping them. There's the northwest corner marker, and there's the northeast one over there." Officer Miller took the document and studied it. His partner walked over to the edge of the water and looked across, confirming the location of the stake. You could see the "oh, of course" expression dawn on Miller's face. He'd seen this movie before. "Well, sir, this certainly seems to be in order." He folded the map and handed it back to me. The caller, a Miss Brenda Albright, was very insistent that this was a common area. I managed a dry smile. Albright and I seemed to have a difference of opinion, based on a difference of facts. The younger officer chuckled under his breath before stifling it. "Look, we're sorry to have bothered you," Miller said, now looking genuinely apologetic. "We have to respond to the call, you understand. We'll go have a chat with the complainant and clear this up." As they turned to leave, he paused and gave me a piece of advice that would prove to be pivotal. "You might want to bring this up at the next HOA meeting," he said quietly, leaning in a bit. "Get it on the record. This isn't the first time we've been called to Azure Springs for enthusiastic enforcement of the rules." He didn't need to say more. I understood perfectly. Brenda wasn't just a nuisance. She was a serial abuser of emergency services. My simmering anger was now mixed with a cold sense of purpose. My retirement project was supposed to be the slow, careful restoration of a 1960s Chris Craft speedboat I had in my new garage. Instead, it was becoming Brenda. That evening, I poured myself a generous glass of 12-year-old scotch, sat down at my desk, and opened the 3-inch binder of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. For the next week, that binder became my Bible. I read every line, every bylaw, every ridiculous regulation. No flags other than the American flag. All basketball hoops must be stored out of sight by sundown. Holiday decorations may not be erected more than 3 weeks prior to the holiday, and must be removed within 1 week after. It was a masterwork of petty tyranny. But I wasn't looking for the petty rules. I was looking for their vulnerabilities, their contradictions, and their overreaches, the places where their self-granted authority ran headfirst into actual, established law. During my binder study, I started taking long walks around the neighborhood, timing them for when people were out gardening or getting their mail. I wasn't there to complain, I was there to listen. And people, it turned out, were desperate to talk. One woman told me she'd been fined $50 a day because the Tuscan gold paint she'd used on her shutters was deemed, by Brenda's Architectural Review Committee of One, to be a shade too yellow. A family with young kids had been cited for leaving a tricycle on their driveway overnight. The stories were all the same. Minor, harmless infractions met with disproportionate, aggressive enforcement. The common denominator was Brenda. Through these quiet conversations, I met Bob. Bob was a retired forensic accountant in his late 60s, a mild-mannered man who had lived in Azure Springs for 15 years. He'd once tried to run for the HOA board to bring some common sense to the table, and had been systematically bullied and slandered by Brenda and her cronies, until he withdrew. He became my first true ally. When I told him my story about the lake, he just nodded slowly. "That sounds like Brenda," he said, his voice laced with years of resentment. "She's always hated that the biggest lot with the lake wasn't part of her community property. She thinks she should have control over everything she can see." Then he leaned in, just as the cop had. "If you really want to know what's going on," he said, "you should look at the landscaping contract. It's held by a company called Evergreen Solutions. It's owned by Brenda's brother-in-law." The next HOA meeting was held in the soulless, beige community clubhouse. I came prepared. When the floor was opened for new business, I stood up. I calmly recounted the incident with the police. I then walked to the front of the room with my certified survey map and a spare copy for the board. "As you can see from the official county records," I began, "the lake is, and always has been, part of my property." Brenda didn't even look at it. She stood up, a smug, condescending smile plastered on her face. "Thank you for your opinion," she said, dripping with sarcasm. "However, you're mistaken." She then held up a document for everyone to see. It was a blurry, obviously photocopied map of the development, looking like it had been run through a mimeograph machine in 1995. The official HOA map, included in the community bylaws, clearly designates the body of water known as Azure Lake as a community common area for aesthetic viewing purposes only. There is no boating, no swimming, and certainly no fishing. You received the bylaws. You should have read them. Her board, a collection of 3 sycophantic bobbleheads, nodded in solemn agreement. They didn't even glance at my professionally prepared survey. They looked only at her. That was the moment I knew this couldn't be solved with a simple conversation. She had built her entire kingdom on this lie, and she would defend it at all costs. She was claiming a piece of my land, my multi-million-dollar property, based on a fuzzy photocopy and sheer force of will. Fine, I thought. Let's see whose will is stronger. The HOA meeting was the final straw. Her public dismissal of a legally binding county document in favor of her own blurry, self-serving map was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. She wasn't just wrong. She was knowingly and willfully asserting control over an asset she had no right to. This moved the situation out of the realm of neighborhood disputes and firmly into the territory of tortious interference with property rights. The next morning, I didn't call a local attorney who handles slip and falls. I called Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been my go-to litigator for the better part of 2 decades. He was a silver-haired shark in a $1,000 suit who didn't just practice law, he wielded it like a weapon. He specialized in complex real estate litigation and viewed fraudulent developers and bureaucratic bullies the way a mongoose views a cobra. I laid the whole story out for him on the phone. The purchase, the private lake, Brenda's police call, the official survey, and her dramatic presentation of the HOA map. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a second, I thought he might find it too petty. Then I heard him let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Oh, this is delicious," he said, his voice gleaming with professional delight. She tried to assert eminent domain with a Kinko's copy? I love it. I'll have an engagement letter over to you this afternoon. Our first front was information. With Bob, my new forensic accountant friend, as our guide, we formally requested, as was my right as a homeowner, to inspect the HOA's complete financial records for the past 7 years. Predictably, Brenda's regime responded by stonewalling. The documents they provided were redacted statements, missing invoices, summarized budgets with no line-item details. It was the classic strategy of malicious compliance designed to frustrate you into giving up. They underestimated me. They also underestimated Marcus. He filed a motion to compel with the local court so fast, it probably left a sonic boom. The motion didn't just ask for the documents, it detailed their refusal and suggested it was evidence of concealing mismanagement or malfeasance, requesting that the judge oversee the handover. While the legal gears were grinding on the financial side, I went back to my own roots. I went on a hunting expedition, and my hunting ground was the county records office. It's a place I know well, a dusty archive of deeds, easements, and forgotten histories stored on microfilm and in massive, leather-bound books. I was looking for the ghost in the machine, the precise moment Brenda's fuzzy map diverged from legal reality. For 3 straight days, I meticulously pulled every single document related to the Azure Springs development, starting from the raw, undeveloped land purchase in the mid-1980s. I traced the lineage of every parcel, every easement, every covenant, and on the afternoon of the 3rd day, covered in dust and fueled by stale coffee, I found it, the smoking gun. It was filed under a miscellaneous docket from 1991, an addendum to the original master plan. The history it revealed was fascinating. The original developer had, in fact, intended for the lake, then designated Parcel A to be a common area. Brenda's map wasn't a forgery, it was just obsolete. But in 1991, the developer had fallen on hard times during a real estate downturn. To secure a crucial line of credit to finish the project, his bank demanded more valuable collateral. His solution was brilliant in its simplicity. He legally amended the master plat, subsuming the 10-acre Parcel A directly into the largest and most desirable property, Lot 1 lot. The change increased the value of Lot 1 exponentially, satisfying the bank and allowing the development to be completed. The annexation was properly filed, witnessed, recorded with the county clerk, and legally unimpeachable. The fledgling HOA, barely a year old at the time and likely run by volunteers who didn't know a plat map from a placemat, had simply never updated its own internal governing documents. For 30 years, they had been operating under a legally void premise. The lake wasn't a common area. It was, and had been, since 1991 private property. I made certified copies of everything: the amendment, the new plat filing, the bank agreements. I had an unbroken, ironclad chain of title. Brenda's entire claim to authority over my water was built on a 30-year-old clerical error. During this period of intense research, the violation letters from Brenda started arriving like clockwork, delivered by certified mail. There was a $100 fine for unauthorized use of a common area, another $250 for my unapproved watercraft, and finally a formal, threatening demand to remove the private boat from community property within 72 hours, or it will be removed at the owner's expense. It was beautiful. Every letter was another nail she was hammering into her own coffin. I didn't argue or respond to her directly. Instead, I forwarded each one to Marcus, who drafted a coolly professional response. Each letter from him cited the specific state statutes regarding private property rights, stated that her claims were baseless and factually incorrect, that her threats constituted harassment, and that all of my client's legal rights were being fully reserved. We were creating a meticulous, damning paper trail of her escalating aggression and our reasonable, fact-based replies. She was a caricature of a bully, completely oblivious that her every move was being documented, cataloged, and prepared for use against her in a legal canon. The real battle wasn't going to be about the lake anymore. That was already won. The real battle was about making her pay for starting the fight. The court order landed on the HOA's desk with the force of a thunderclap. The judge, swayed by Marcus's motion and the HOA's transparent attempts at hiding information, not only ordered them to produce every single unredacted financial document, but appointed a neutral third-party clerk to oversee the process and ensure compliance. 2 weeks later, 6 boxes of documents were delivered to Bob's house. For one glorious, coffee-fueled weekend, Bob and I turned his dining room into a war room. It was like Christmas morning for a forensic accountant, and what we found was more brazen than either of us had imagined. The landscaping contract with Evergreen Solutions, owned by Brenda's brother-in-law, was a masterpiece of grift. Bob pulled quotes from 3 other major landscaping firms in the area and demonstrated that Evergreen was overcharging the HOA by a minimum of 40% across the board, year after year. That alone amounted to more than $250,000 in fraudulent overbilling over the last decade. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was a line item that appeared every quarter labeled community consulting fees. It was a vague, amorphous charge that amounted to nearly $50,000 a year. There were no invoices, just direct payments to a shell corporation. It took me less than an hour of digging through state business registration databases to find the owner of Azure Community Consultants, LLC. It was registered to Brenda's husband. It was a straight-up kickback scheme, a phantom company set up for the sole purpose of siphoning money from the HOA's operating budget directly into their own pockets. They were stealing from their neighbors. Worse still, we found evidence they had been improperly dipping into the HOA's reserve fund money, legally set aside for major capital repairs, like paving roads and replacing roofs on community buildings. They had used over $150,000 from the reserves for what the books called aesthetic enhancements, which, after cross-referencing with public work permits, turned out to be new cobblestone walkways, a fancy gazebo, and extensive professional landscaping installed on the common properties immediately surrounding Brenda's own home. She wasn't just embezzling. She was using the community's emergency savings to increase her own property value. We now had 2 slam-dunk cases. First, the absolute, inarguable proof of my private property rights to the lake. Second, irrefutable evidence of systematic, long-term financial fraud perpetrated by Brenda and her cronies. Marcus's legal advice was decisive. "We don't just file a lawsuit," he said over the phone, his voice humming with predatory energy. "A lawsuit is quiet. It gets bogged down in discovery for 2 years. These people are mushrooms. They thrive in the dark and feed on filth. We are going to turn on every light in the building at once and watch them scurry." He directed me to a clause in the HOA bylaws, allowing homeowners to force a special meeting of the membership with a petition signed by just 25% of the residents. Bob and I drafted a simple petition. It didn't lay out all our evidence. It just stated that we, the undersigned homeowners, had uncovered grave concerns regarding potential property rights disputes and serious fiscal mismanagement by the current board, and demanded a special meeting to address the membership. We went door to door. We didn't need to do much convincing. The moment we mentioned fiscal mismanagement, people were eager to sign. The years of resentment over petty fines and Brenda's tyrannical rule had created a powder keg, and we were just handing them the match. We got signatures from over 60% of the homeowners in a single weekend. The special meeting was scheduled. The trap was set. The evening of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It was standing room only. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Brenda and her board sat at a long table at the front, looking supremely annoyed, but still radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance. She clearly believed this was just a public forum for a few disgruntled residents to vent before she and her board would benevolently vote down whatever motion they proposed. She banged the gavel. "I'm calling this special meeting to order," she announced, her voice dripping with disdain. "The floor is open." Marcus had instructed me on the precise choreography. As per the bylaws, I stood up and was recognized. I started calmly. I told the story of buying my home, of my desire for a quiet retirement, and of the peaceful mornings I'd spent fishing. Then I told them about being visited by the police for trespassing on my own property. A murmur went through the crowd. Then I unveiled my first exhibit. Using a projector we had brought, I displayed the official, stamped, and certified county plat map on a large screen for everyone to see. The lines were crisp and clear, showing Lot 1 encompassing the entire lake. Then I put Brenda's blurry HOA map up beside it. The contrast was damning. "This," I said, pointing to my map, "is the legal reality recorded at the county courthouse. This," I said, pointing to hers, "is a fantasy used to justify harassment." Brenda shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. Our documents are the governing documents for this community." "Your map is a forgery!" The crowd was now shouting. It was pandemonium, and that was Marcus's cue. He strode to the front of the room, his presence instantly commanding silence. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "the only forgery here is the authority you believe you have. My client's evidence is not up for debate." He then turned to the assembled homeowners. And unfortunately, that's not the worst of it. With a click of the remote, the maps vanished from the screen and were replaced by the first page of the Evergreen Solutions landscaping invoice. The show was just beginning. The immediate fallout in the clubhouse was pure, unadulterated chaos. As Marcus methodically walked the homeowners through the evidence projecting the inflated landscaping invoices next to competitor quotes, the bank statements showing direct payments to Brenda's husband's shell company, the transfers from the emergency reserve fund, the mood in the room curdled from simple anger into a cold, vengeful fury. People were on their feet, shouting. They weren't just angry about a rule-obsessed tyrant anymore. They were realizing, in real time, that the money she had used to fund her lavish lifestyle and pad her property value was their money. The money they had paid in dues for road repairs and community upkeep had been systematically looted. Brenda's face had drained of all color, going from a splotchy, indignant red to a pasty, ashen gray. She sat frozen, her mouth slightly agape, as her entire kingdom of lies and graft crumbled around her in a public spectacle of her own making. Her enablers on the board looked physically ill, their eyes darting around for an exit that didn't exist. Bob, my mild-mannered accountant ally, was the one who sealed their fate. He stood up, and with the righteous fury of a man who had been bullied into silence for years, he made a motion based on a bylaw for emergency removal of the board, for gross negligence and malfeasance. "All in favor of removing the entire current HOA board, effective immediately," he shouted over the din. A forest of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. It was a complete and total rout. In the space of 30 minutes, Brenda had gone from untouchable queen to a deposed, disgraced pariah. An interim board was nominated and elected on the spot, with a shell-shocked but resolute Bob unanimously voted in as the new treasurer. His first official act was to accept the binder of evidence from Marcus and formally declare that the new HOA would be pursuing all legal remedies against the former board members. The legal consequences were swift and brutal. Marcus had already packaged our entire investigation and forwarded it to the white-collar crime division of the local district attorney's office and the state's professional licensing board that oversaw community associations. With the HOA itself now cooperating as a victim, the DA had an airtight case. Brenda and her husband were indicted on multiple felony counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her brother-in-law was named as a co-conspirator. The other board members, facing immense civil liability and potential criminal charges themselves, flipped on her instantly, giving prosecutors detailed testimony in exchange for immunity. Brenda's suburban dream house became her prison, to afford the kind of top-tier criminal defense attorneys she now desperately needed. She had to take out a massive second mortgage on her home. The community she had once ruled with an iron fist now openly scorned her. Her white Lexus, once a symbol of her status, now just attracted scornful glares as she drove to and from her lawyer's office. And this is where we get to the final accounting. the $1.6 million price tag for her arrogance. It wasn't a single bill, but a cascade of financial ruin. First, the civil lawsuit. The new HOA, with Bob carefully guiding the ship and Marcus acting as their counsel, sued Brenda and her husband personally to claw back every penny they had stolen. After reviewing the evidence, the court awarded the HOA a judgment for $850,000, covering the embezzled funds, fraudulent overpayments, looted reserve funds, and punitive damages. That was the first big hit. Second, her own legal fees. Fighting a multi-front war against the DA and a civil lawsuit from the HOA is not cheap. Her high-priced lawyers for both the criminal and civil cases cost her an estimated $350,000 out of pocket. That's money she'd never get back. Third, the criminal restitution. To avoid a lengthy jail sentence, Brenda ultimately took a plea deal. She got 5 years of probation and had to pay court-ordered restitution to the HOA, separate from the civil judgment, totaling another $150,000. Fourth, and perhaps most poetic, was the loss on her house. With mounting legal debts, judgments, and her name now synonymous with scandal in the local papers, she was forced to sell her home. But selling a house in a community where you're the infamous felon who stole from all your neighbors is a tough proposition. She had to list it at a fire sale price just to get it sold. The market had dipped slightly, and the stigma surrounding the property cost her dearly. Between the panic sale and the depressed price, she lost over $250,000 in equity. When you add it all up, the $850,000 civil judgment, the $350,000 in her own legal fees, the $150,000 in criminal restitution, and the $250,000 plus she lost on her home, the grand total of her financial destruction comes to a conservative $1.6 million. All of it, every single dollar, can be traced back to the single defining moment she decided to pick up the phone and call the cops on a man quietly fishing on his own lake. My life, on the other hand, returned to the blissful peace I had originally sought. The lake was mine, unequivocally. The new HOA, run by sensible people like Bob, was a dream. They used the recovered funds to slash dues by 30% for 2 years and properly fund the reserves. They repaved the roads and held a community barbecue where I was awkwardly feted as some kind of folk hero. I never wanted the fight, but I have to admit, the victory was sweet. The best moment came a few months later. I was out on my pontoon boat, right in the middle of the lake, my Chris Craft restoration project finally underway in the garage. I saw Bob walking down the gentle slope of my lawn toward my dock, carrying 2 coffee mugs. He untied the dinghy I kept there and rowed out to meet me. He handed me a mug. We just sat there for a few minutes, enjoying the silence, watching a heron hunt for its breakfast on the far shore. 2 quiet retirements, he said, finally raising his cup. I clinked my mug against his, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a very long time. And, "To proper land surveys," I replied. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had an HOA story from hell, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.